I have some poll results. I have data on this. Can you be critical of something you like? So can you love something, but still think critically about it and maybe have some suggestions or criticisms? Because it seems like on Facebook, in like my cruising group, which is the Carnival VIFP Club members group, which you can find at facebook.com/groups/Carnival VIFP Club. The community there is mostly amazing, but there just seems to be this current of people who don't run the show, I should stress, who just believe that you should never say anything critical about something you enjoy. And so if somebody has a negative review or had a bad experience or wishes something could be improved, it seems like there's this cadre of people that just pounce on them and being like, you should never be negative. And to me, that's a little crazy. It's a little cultish because I think that like, if all you can ever do is say good things about Dear Leader, then you're not really...
Yeah, but there's always ways to improve things.
Exactly.
Right?
Perfect is rare.
Yeah, perfection is non-existent. It's you need yeah,
and it's like if you like it and you want it to continue to stay relevant and financially viable and a success, then you might want to be invested in providing some feedback. Carnival goes to great lengths to get feedback. They send out the surveys and all that other stuff that they do. You know, Healed is constantly asking questions on his Facebook page, etc. We had a survey in our group and we got 1,310 votes.
Oh.
So the question was, what do you think of Carnival Cruise Lines? Because I wanted to find out, like, am I leading a cult and didn't know it? And so the results were interesting. There were 5 options, which is sort of how you standardly do an opinion scale.
Yep.
So there was, at the bottom end, horrible, they never do anything right.
What?
0%.
Okay,
nobody, like not enough to get a single, like a percent. Some people did vote for it, and it is interesting. Some people come into the group and stay in the group and say that Carnival's horrible and they're never going to sail there again. And our group is exclusively about Carnival, and they hang around.
Yeah.
And
so why are you hanging around over something that you don't like?
Yeah. I mean, if they want to participate in our group, okay, I guess. I mean, you know, we're all about free speech and different opinions, but and there's not many of them, but the ones that do exist, we scratch our heads.
Yeah.
And so then one step up from that, they're pretty bad, only had 1%. So that's pretty good.
Okay, but it depends on what people's expectations are.
That's huge too.
Yeah.
Because there's the fellow who calls himself Tom Cruise, who does the lectures on the Journeys cruises, who we enjoy. We actually interviewed him. He was lovely, talking about Journeys cruises. You can check that video out. And he has this presentation he makes about being an adventurer.
Yeah.
So he says, like, if you are a tourist, the best that you can hope for is have your expectations met. Mm-hmm. So, like, I'm a tourist and I'm going to a resort in Mexico and I want all the food to be of a certain quality and free and included and served promptly and all that. And so it's really hard for that person to be pleasantly surprised by something. Mm-hmm. They got to go really hard the extra mile. And so, like, if you're there and then maybe, I don't know, somebody's doing a fire dance or something, you're like, oh, okay, that might exceed your expectations, but that's the surprise. It's only the first time. And if you do much research beforehand, you're not going to have that. So, for the most part, he argues that tourists, the best they can hope for is have their expectations met.
Yeah.
Whereas he says adventurers go out and, like, they don't necessarily have a plan. They don't necessarily do all the research, which is ironic given that we provide information.
Yeah.
But I consider myself a bit of an adventurer, and that's a perspective we try to give on this podcast and in our channel. Like today, even here in Oregon, we went out to some various waterfalls.
We did, yeah.
And we didn't know what we were expecting.
No.
So everything we saw was just a lovely surprise.
Yep.
We went looking for this castle called the Witch's Castle, which is just this kind of, like, rundown.
I thought it was an actual
thing.
castle, and it really wasn't.
Yeah, and it was covered in graffiti and stuff, but it still had its charm.
Yeah.
And like a lot of the waterfalls we saw and stuff like that, like they were all like that. And so what expectations do you go in with? If you are expecting the best service all the time, every second of every day,
you're going to be sorely disappointed.
I mean, almost anywhere you would go expecting something like that, potentially. Yeah. And I mean, you have to kind of consider the price point it's at. It's not celebrity. It's not Disney, depending on what you want. And so it was interesting that 1%, again, people in the group said they're pretty bad, but perhaps they're hoping it gets better. Maybe that's why they're in the group.
But it also depends on what are they saying that's bad. It could just be
true.
One item. It
well,
could be
and that's
one
the thing.
thing out of their whole trip that was bad.
We could have single issue voters.
Yeah.
If you just came off of a bad experience, you might be like kind of having an axe to grind.
Yeah, it's like, for example, oh, my food was 10 minutes late, so they're bad. Well, but everything else was good. You know, like, really is... your food being delivered 10 minutes late, is that really a bad thing?
Well, and it's interesting because I was reading an Andrew Matthews book. It's his new book.
Okay.
And he actually had a page that talked about cruising. He says you might think it's lovely to live on a cruise ship for the rest of your life, but after you're there for a couple of months, you'd start nitpicking little things.
Yes.
And if the food's 10 minutes late, it was actually that exact example that you just made,
Oh.
except it was about room service. It was like, oh, if room service is 10 minutes late, you'd start nitpicking that if that's your personality. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, anything in a poll like this where it's like a really low number, it's kind of extreme. So they're okay, nothing special was only 7% of respondents, which is interesting.
Okay.
So
out of what, 1,000 people?
1,300.
7% of 1,300.
Yeah, they said they're just okay. And so that makes some sense. Maybe, you know, they go sometimes and they're in the group for information. Maybe, I don't know.
Yep.
But here's interesting. They're great, not perfect, but pretty awesome was one of the options. 89%.
Well, okay.
So that's the vast majority. And so that leaves just 3% who said they are perfect and nothing ever goes wrong.
Okay.
So there's your cultist. There's the 3% that says they can do no wrong under any circumstances and have never done, which is kind of interesting. But the majority is they're great, but they're not perfect. And so that was really, for me, validating because it's like, okay, so it looks like the vast majority of people, 89%, get that you can love something and still wish it to be a little bit better.
Yeah.
And still sometimes have some critical thoughts about it. Like, because I enjoy a cruise, and I've said this before, it doesn't mean I turn my brain off.
Yeah.
You know, I still might be like, I'm curious about things. I try new things, explore, and I think critically. And sometimes I just sit there and I think, oh, how could if I was in charge, how could I make this better? It's kind of like a fun thought exercise.
Well, it's just of all the cruises that I've been on, I always think about what if there's a medical emergency on board that causes the ship to miss a port.
And that's happened to us.
And it has happened to us. And I'm wondering, well, what about the people on the ship that get affected by that? Are they really making a blame, saying, oh, the cruise ship could have been done better, or this is a horrible cruise ship, or, you know,
it's like
a person's having a medical emergency.
Have some compassion.
Yeah.
Be human.
It's like, be human. And yeah, it's not the cruise's fault.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's person has a medical issue. It's not much they can do about it. And I'm wondering how many percentage of those people would be like, oh, this is a horrible cruise because of that.
Ooh. Okay, I think we might have a future poll. So if you want to vote on a future poll topic, make sure you're in our Facebook group, because I'm thinking a question around, like, who do you blame for a diverted port due to medical emergency, or how do you feel about it? I will give that some thought. Stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and our YouTube channel to see where that goes. But I do find it interesting that people who say that, like, they're horrible is 0%, but they're perfect is 3%. So both of those numbers are incredibly low, and I just think that those are very vocal minorities.
Yeah.
So when somebody is kind of screaming at you, how dare you say something critical, or, oh, these guys completely suck in every way you can possibly imagine, I think you can kind of take it with a giant grain of salt, almost to the point of largely ignoring those people in the very far extremes, because it's not the normal experience or reaction to the experience.
Yeah.
And I've got the data to back it up, so that's nice. So take a breath and calm down. If you think they're perfect or you think they're the worst thing ever, you're probably not totally right. Reality is probably somewhere in between.
Yeah.
As with most things.
Nothing's perfect in life, so
yeah,
expect the unexpected.